Instead of the Gospel, I'm going to read from the book of Genesis. And as you know, all three faiths, the Jewish faith, Christianity, and Islam, have been inspired by the story of Abraham, and in particular, the story of Abraham welcoming and offering hospitality to strangers. We learned that it was the godly thing to do, and Jesus tells us that in welcoming the stranger, we also welcome him. This reading is taken from Genesis 18, verses 1 to 8. Yahweh appeared to him at the oak of Mamre, while he was sitting by the entrance of the tent during the hottest part of the day. He looked up, and there he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them and bowed to the ground. "My lords," he said, "if I find favor with you, please do not pass your servant by. Let me have a little water brought, and you can wash your feet and have a rest under the tree. Let me fetch a little bread, and you can refresh yourselves before going further, now that you have come in your servant's direction." They replied, "Do as you say." Abraham hurried to the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick, knead 3 measures of best flour and make loaves." Then, running to the herd, Abraham took a fine and tender calf and gave it to the servant, who hurried to prepare it. Then, taking curds, milk, and the calf which had been prepared, he laid all before them, and they ate while he remained standing near them under the tree. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Second Ecumenical Council of the Vatican, commonly called Vatican II, opened on October the 11th, 1962. I was 13 at that stage. But 3 years before that, in my hometown of Wexford, down in the southeast of Ireland, in Hill Street where I lived, strangers moved into the house next door. I had heard about such people, but had never met one. They were Protestants. And in my little mind, something had to be done about them, because I had no doubt at that stage that Catholics were right and Protestants were wrong. So I twisted my sister's arm, told no one else, and set out with the large, big family Bible under my arm, and went in to convert these people next door. They were a lovely, friendly young couple from Wales, and they welcomed this little delegation, and they didn't take any offense. We did not set out to welcome strangers. We set out to change them. But it was strangers who welcomed us. Over time, observing their obvious goodness, we became friends. And then the labels and the judgments and the requirement that they change no longer made sense. Strangers had found a welcome in our hearts. A number of years ago, I was in a retreat center, and early one morning, I like to get up early normally. It was very quiet in the place, and I went down to the prayer room, which was just a square room, but there was a little alcove off the square, and there was the Blessed Sacrament and 4 chairs. And I sat on the first chair and closed my eyes and went into prayer. And it was lovely for a while. And then someone came in to the room, banging the door. And I was annoyed. But I kept my eyes closed. I didn't want to see who the noisy stranger was. And where do you think they went? They didn't stay in the prayer room. No. Over they came to the alcove. And where would you think they sat? Not on the fourth chair, not on the third chair, but right beside me. I was really getting irritated, but I kept my eyes closed. I resisted looking. And then the silence returned, and gradually something began to come to my awareness. Began to realize that for some strange reason, I've noticed that we were almost breathing in unison, whoever they were. And after another stage, another few minutes, I had this sense that our hearts were beating in rhythm with one another. It was lovely. And then, do you know what happened then? Whoever she was, whoever he was, got up, left, banged the door as they went out. And I felt something quite different at that stage. I felt a sense of abandonment. I felt sad. I felt a sense of loss. And I realized then that in that prayer time, I had gone below the surface. I had been gifted to go below the surface of life and recognize that separation is an illusion, that we are one family, profoundly connected. Separation, isolation are unnatural. When we live like strangers, we're actually living contrary to our nature. And if it hadn't been in the quiet in prayer, I would have missed the deep desire to connect and then to experience the connection. When we listen deeply, when we come home to ourselves, we tune into this. When we listen deeply, we notice the rightness, the joy of connecting, and the grief and the loss of separation, even at simple goodbyes. And when we listen deeply, we discover that divisions and prejudice and violence and fear of others and racism and even disunity between churches and communities, they all cause our hearts, our spirits, our very souls to feel deep grief. And they're not just bad ideas or something we shouldn't engage in, but they grieve us. They close our hearts to the strangers of our lives. And they make us strangers to our very selves. I have a woman friend in Galway City. You could say she's strange, maybe better, she's unique, because she takes Jesus at his word. Maybe she's not strange, maybe she's normal, and maybe we're the strange ones. One day, she dressed in old clothes, a worn-out overcoat and a hat, and went into Shop Street in the city. She wanted to get a sense of what it might be like to be poor or homeless or a beggar. She wanted to walk in their shoes a little. It was her way of welcoming the stranger. So she arrived in busy Shop Street. She found a doorway, sat down on the ground, and put out her begging bowl. Most passed by, ignoring her. Some dropped a coin or two into her bowl. But you know what was the toughest part of the experience for her? Hardly anyone made eye contact with her. Hardly anyone acknowledged her as a person. Even a couple of people whom she did know, she did recognize, did drop in coins into the bowl, but they didn't notice, they didn't see her. And she told me that she left Shop Street that day with a more welcoming heart for the stranger who may be homeless, desperate, lost, begging. She got beneath the surface and saw the stranger not primarily as threat, as problem, as nuisance, as statistic, as an object, but flesh and blood like ours, longing to be recognized most of all as a human being, as a person. Bruce is an American student, and he came to Dublin to study for a master's degree in economics. And Bruce is a gay man. He's seriously into his studies, and he's seriously into working out at the gym. One day, after a workout and a swim, Bruce went into the college sauna, and he sat there alone for a while, and he just enjoyed the heat of the sauna, relaxing. Then a group came in, and listening to them, he realized that they were the university's men's rowing team. And Bruce enjoyed listening to their chat, to their banter, and to their humor. And then the atmosphere changed for Bruce. Suddenly, the sauna didn't feel safe anymore. The reason for this was that one of the team members told a joke about gay men, making fun of gays. And while Bruce knew that none of this group knew him, and that none of them could know that he was gay, yet still he felt immediately threatened, felt unsafe, felt unwelcome, felt the chill an unwelcome visitor must feel. And then something happened, unexpectedly. The captain of the rowing team, he leaned forward and he looked at the teammate down the bench who told the homophobic joke, and he said to him, "Do you have a problem with gays?" The joke teller blushed and awkwardly stammered, "No, I didn't mean anything by it." And for Bruce, that sauna suddenly became safe again. He suddenly felt welcome, and he felt deeply grateful to the captain of the rowing team. That captain, unbeknownst to himself, had welcomed the stranger. With a few words spoken out of humanity and decency, he had made the world a safe place, a safer place. Our words, our silences can make others strangers, or we can make them feel welcome. Many of you may know this, but the average age of the members of this community is 74. If the two youngest of the community are taken out of the calculation, the average age shoots up to 80. Some days I look at some of the men in the house, or some days I just simply look in the mirror, and I think about myself and the others. He looks older today, or in pain today. And in fact, we really don't talk a lot about our aches and pains that much. But you know that for each of us, inevitably, from time to time, when pains and aches or worse come, we must wonder, is sister or brother death coming to get us? Or is sister or brother death just paying us a short visit today? It may be in the guise of a new pain or ache. What worked yesterday isn't working today. Our formerly well-oiled hinges are creaking for lack of oil, and the oil supply is exhausted. And so, do we see death as an unwelcome stranger? Do we see aging as an enemy? Do we welcome this stranger? Over 20 years ago now, I was with my dad when the consultant told him that he'd inoperable cancer. Later, on my own, I asked the consultant how long Dad might have to live. 2 years, he thought. He couldn't be sure. Dad was 78 at the time, and he did die in his 80th year. And for the early part of Dad's sickness, I struggled and grieved and cried and really fought his cancer. I saw it as the enemy, certainly as the unwelcome stranger. It was a tormenting time. I felt hurt, powerless, and my body was sore with grief. And then I came across the words about sickness and death by Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit priest and a paleontologist. And in his book, The Divine Milieu, he writes the following: "When the signs of age begin to mark my body, and still more when they touch my mind, when the ill that is to diminish me or carry me off strikes from without or is born within me, when the painful moment comes in which I suddenly awake to the fact that I am ill or growing old, and above all at that last moment when I feel that I am losing hold of myself and am absolutely passive within the hands of the great unknown forces that have formed me. In all those moments, O God, grant that I may understand that it is you who are painfully parting the fibers of my being in order to penetrate to the very marrow of my substance and bear me away within yourself." Those words help me to see aging, sickness, death itself no longer as an unwelcome, intrusive stranger, but as our Creator parting the fibers of our being and reweaving them into the very heart and mystery of our God. And so with Dad at that time, and with sickness and aging today, I now find de Chardin's words inviting me not to be happy about pain and death and aging, but to no longer see them as the enemy, and some days no longer to see them as the unwelcome stranger, but even as an angel bringing us home. And to finish, about 15 years ago, I was living down in our community in Dublin, and I used to get up around 4:30 each morning and head out for an hour's walk. It was a lovely neighborhood. And I remember some lovely, fine, sunny mornings. It wasn't sunny right at 4:30, but soon it was later, in the month of June. The birds were already singing at that stage. They were early risers too. And the foxes were out foraging. And you could get the scent of the flowers coming from the gardens along the way as I walked. One morning, as I was minutes away from arriving back at our Redemptorist house there, I heard some muttering and shouting. And as I turned a corner, there, stretched out on the footpath, on the sidewalk, was a man very drunk, surrounded by broken glass and lying in his own urine and spilled alcohol. His voice disturbed the peace of the lovely neighborhood. And to be honest, I gave him a wide berth. I moved out into the middle of the road as I passed him. And I was annoyed at him. I was annoyed at the mess he was making of the footpath, and how his voice, I knew, was traveling and waking up neighbors from their sleep. And that happened a number of mornings. I can assure you, I had no welcome for this stranger. He was a nuisance, a disturbance. And then one morning, as I neared the scene, I remembered a prayer or a mantra to say when faced with someone I dislike or reject, some stranger I want to have nothing to do with. And so, thinking of this man, and probably through gritted teeth, said that prayer, that mantra, very simple one, simple to say, very hard to say it. You and I are one. You and I are one. So each morning I began using this mantra, thinking of my drunk friend, my drunk nuisance. And as I repeated the mantra over and over and would approach where this man kept turning up drunk, something began to shift. The criticism of him began to ease off a bit. Strangely, I even began to sort of look forward a bit to seeing him and hearing him. We actually never spoke. And then one morning, he was gone, never to return. And I felt a sense of loss. I missed him. Somehow he'd moved from being just the nuisance, the disturbance, the unwelcome stranger, to being a fellow human being. There are lots of strangers in our lives and in our world. Some can really get on our nerves. Some we may detest. Some we may hate. And all of that is normal enough. And then we think of Abraham, and we hear Jesus, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And we might try using those words of the mantra. Don't start off with the most difficult cases, but start off with those you dislike, those you want to keep as stranger. And I'll try and do the same. Even if it's through gritted teeth. You and I are one.